Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Welcome back to Case of the Sunday Scaries. I'm Elyse, and this is the first episode in hopefully many. I'm thinking I want to make this a series. You let me know if you want to see more of these episodes covering the golden age of Hollywood. My mom and I used to watch musicals like King and I, White Christmas, My Fair Lady, and maybe that's why I've always been enamored with this period in time. I am a sucker for a black and white movie. Some like it hot, top 5 films. But now as an adult, it's clear that Tinseltown was not just movie stars, beautiful outfits, and the glitz and glamour I thought it was when I was a kid. Behind the scenes, there's a darker side, a world of cover-ups, secrets, and even possible murder. Today, we're covering the life and untimely death of Natalie Wood. As always, I want to remind you that I compile research for these episodes from publicly available sources and use that research to form my own opinion. It's not meant to harm anybody I discuss in these episodes. Before we dive in, I have to tell you why I chose this case to cover first. I loved West Side Story growing up, and Natalie Wood playing Maria, absolutely stunning. Very embarrassing, was probably caught multiple times, like snapping my fingers to the Jets song and Stay Cool Boy, and definitely put on my fluffiest dress and twirled around to the song I Feel Pretty. I'm a dork. I embrace it. Fast forward quite a few years, and when we were going through the pandemic, I had been working at the time as a makeup artist and teaching makeup to aspiring makeup artists. As you can imagine, that was a hard job to keep up when you can't be within 6 feet of people. Needless to say, I lost my job. So I did not know what to do. I thought about all the jobs I could take, which weren't many at the time, and went back to something I knew from my early 20s, which was slinging drinks at a hotel in Scottsdale called the Valley Ho. After a long and very boring orientation day, they ended it by giving us a tour of the property. On the second floor, the concierge was giving us the history of the hotel, how it was known to be the go-to spot for the who's who movie stars of the time, who all wanted to escape the flashing lights of Hollywood before Palm Springs became the place. She came up to one frame in particular that held a wedding photo, and suddenly she had my full attention. She told the story of how Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood came to Scottsdale to have a small private wedding ceremony and held their reception there at the hotel that I was now working at. As I went to the front of the group to take a closer look at the simple, glamorous photo of Natalie and Robert standing with the founders of the hotel on their wedding day, someone behind me said, "Wait a minute. Isn't that the guy who ended up killing her?" Let's just say my interest was piqued, and with nothing but time on my hands, probably too much time on my hands, I went on a deep dive learning more about Natalie Wood. To me, she had just been Maria, a character from a movie I loved. But murdered? I honestly had never heard anything about it. The story I'm about to tell you today kind of became my parlor trick of sorts. If someone was sitting at the bar alone or seemed like they needed distraction from what we all were experiencing during that time, out came the story of the beautiful Hollywood actress who got married in this very hotel and died under suspicious circumstances. I played up the drama. In a way, the story of Natalie Wood is where, unbeknownst to me, I would start to learn how to do the research and retell these stories in a way that is hopefully entertaining. I do think the alcohol I was serving probably kept patrons at the bar listening to my long-winded ramblings, but who knows? This story planted a seed for what would later become this podcast and now YouTube channel, where I share these victim stories with you all. Natalie Wood, or Natalia Zakharenko, which is a beautiful name and was her birth name, was born July 20th, 1938 to Russian immigrants Maria and Nicholas Zakharenko, after their families had fled Russia during the Russian Civil War. Natalie's parents ended up settling in California, and let's just say neither of them was going to win an award for Parent of the Year. Her dad, unfortunately, was an alcoholic who had sometimes a pretty violent temper. I've never seen anything in the research that he abused Natalie in any way, but who knows? But it's Natalie's mother that we're going to be focusing on a lot. Maria was a stage mom of the highest degree. She had dreamed about being a ballet dancer on stage, and unfortunately, her dreams were never realized. So she decided to put all of her hopes and dreams, all of her energy into making her two young girls into the star that she had never been. And here's the thing. Every parent should want a better life for their children than their own experience. However, healthy parents would want their children to discover their own dreams, their own interests, and champion them pursuing that path. But not Natalie's mother. You see, before even coming to America, Maria had visited a psychic who told her that she would have a daughter who would be a beauty that would be known internationally, which was music to Maria's ears, right? But the psychic also had a warning for her. That same beautiful daughter would drown in dark waters. Maria told Natalie as a child this story over and over and over, instilling a very deep fear, maybe even phobia of water in Natalie. I mean, could you imagine? Like, that's your bedtime story. All right, girls, let's tuck in for the night. I'm going to tell you of the time that I saw a psychic, and she said one of you is going to be a star and then drown tragically in dark, cold waters. Not exactly a comforting bedtime story to tell your children. However, for Maria, this reinforced her desire to make her daughters famous. By the age of 3, Natalie was in ballet classes and constantly visiting the cinema with her mom. Which sounds nice, except for the fact that this was her mom's way of training her in acting since they couldn't afford acting classes. Now, I don't have children, so I'm never going to be one to give parenting advice. But to me, this story is already so tragic because, in my opinion, children should be children. They should not have the responsibility of a network, a studio, a television show, and others' livelihoods on their shoulders. And we've seen time and time again that unless you have someone who truly has your best interests at heart and is willing to advocate for you and guard you from all of the exposure to things that children shouldn't be exposed to at that young age, the child is usually one that pays the price for that fame and exposure, right? And Maria was delighted when, before the age of 5, some crew members on a film set actually did notice Natalie, and she had a 15-second part in the movie Happyland. But 15 seconds was apparently all it took to catch the eye of director Irving Pitchell. He saw something in Natalie, and when a role came up a few years later he thought she'd be perfect for, he calls up Maria and asks her to bring Natalie in for a screen test. As you can imagine, Maria jumped at the opportunity, but she was so confident that this was the moment that she had prepared herself for her daughter for, that not only did she bring Natalie to LA for the screen test, she knew she was going to get the role, right? Natalie had to get this role. So she packed up everything, the whole family, and moved them to LA before Natalie was even given the part. Fortunately, this plan worked out for Maria. I don't know if this plan really worked out for Natalie, but Natalie was cast in her first movie, Tomorrow is Forever, starring across Orson Welles. But when Natalie, because she's a child with no acting experience, could not cry on cue for a scene, Mommy Dearest stepped in. So I could not figure out why there was a butterfly in a cage of some sort on set, but apparently there was. And it's rumored that when Natalie couldn't cry on cue, Maria ripped the wings off the butterfly in front of Natalie to bring her to tears before ushering her back on set to carry out this scene.
What is it, Kester? What's happened?
It's the song that reminds her of a gun. It reminds her of the time the Nazis killed her mother.
This brief role was not what cemented her stardom, but it certainly got her noticed. Orson Welles, probably on the short list of greatest filmmakers of all time, later said that Natalie was, quote, so good she was terrifying. She didn't act from a script, she acted from the heart. Natalie's big break came when she was signed with 20th Century Fox and got the role of a lifetime. She was cast in Miracle on 34th Street in 1947. This movie, I'm sure you've heard of it, quickly became a holiday classic, so much so that I think they've remade it like 3 times. This role shot her to fame, and she would go on to work on 20 films as a child actress. While filming The Green Promise, 11-year-old Natalie, who had a horrible fear of water instilled in her by her mother, was filming a scene where she's just supposed to run across this bridge. No problem, right? Except as she's running, what would be the luck of the bridge collapsing? And collapse it did. And Natalie not only fell into the water, but broke her wrist. But being a mother dearest, Maria didn't even allow Natalie time to see a doctor or be treated or get a cast. Of course not, because her daughter couldn't be the one known for holding up production. So it was back to work for Natalie right away. Obviously, this experience would be scary for anyone, but it cemented Natalie's fear of drowning and water in general to the point that Natalie would never even learn how to swim. But because her wrist didn't have an opportunity to heal correctly, she was also left with a bump on her left wrist that she was pretty insecure about. She would spend the rest of her days hiding it with costumes or jewelry on films or any public event.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Now, before I tell you this next part, please keep in mind this has never been proven to be fact. This is all alleged, so if you're a big Frank Sinatra stan, do not come for me. But I do have to say multiple people have co-signed that this story is true. That Natalie's mother, who was willing to do anything, and I do mean anything to keep her daughter in the limelight, would go on to act as a trafficker to her teenage daughter. Natalie and her mom were at the studio lot and they saw Frank Sinatra, who was top of the list, huge star of the time. And so they went over and introduced themselves. And apparently, Maria thought accepting his invitation to come over for a party at his house could be Natalie's golden ticket, open all these doors for her that weren't open before. George Jacobs, who was basically Frank Sinatra's right-hand man, wrote a memoir of his time working with Sinatra from 1953 to 1968. He was with him for a good chunk of time. And he wrote in his book, quote, "One affair that, unlike the others, was conducted in top secret was with Natalie Wood, because she was a minor at the time, either 15 or 16, though she didn't act like it. Sinatra adored this tiny beauty." He went on to say that he mixed the drinks when Natalie's insanely ambitious Russian mother brought Natalie to Sinatra's apartment for a cocktail in 1954 and, quote, pushed her on Frank, who needed no pushing. Sinatra told Jacobs that he had been taken by Natalie since he had seen her on Miracle on 34th Street. She was 8 years old when she filmed that movie, let me remind you. How can you be taken with an 8-year-old? I mean, you could say that she was very talented, but that just feels a little creepy to me. Maria apparently brought Natalie to Sinatra's apartment, all dolled up, and in Jacob's words, quote, total jailbait in a form-fitting black party dress, and Mr. S, Sinatra, went for it in a big way, end quote. He reported that the 38-year-old Sinatra continued to invite 15 or 16-year-old Natalie Wood over alone multiple times for singing lessons. Disgustingly, Jacobs closed the story with this writing. Mr. S truly cherished her, and whatever went on in private, he was also a father to her more than her own father. He was very protective. That's called grooming, not being protective. Okay, let's just clear that right up. And it certainly makes this later appearance on the Sinatra show feel a bit icky.
You know, somebody told me they read an article about the two of us.
Really? What did it say?
Well, it said that when we were working on Kings Go Forth, that I fell in love with you. Isn't that ridiculous?
I never heard anything so. See, what's so ridiculous about that? What's R.J. Wagner got that I haven't got?
Well, there's so many things that attracted me to Bob. I mean, well, for one thing, he's an actor.
I was an actor long before he was.
He's a star.
I was a star long before he was.
He's young.
I was young long before. Wait a minute. Hold it. You Mata Harry, you tricked me into that.
Oh, Frank, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. You know, there is one thing that you can do better than Bob.
With that?
Well, you can sing better than he can.
Mm-hmm.
Would you sing something for me?
Flattery will get you nowhere. You've ruffled the Sinatra feathers.
Oh.
Tragically, that would not be the only predatory experience Natalie had. There was a rumor in Hollywood that a married actor, twice Natalie's age, had violently sexually assaulted her. Her sister Lana would later write in her book that at the age of 16, Natalie, with the help of her mother, got all dolled up, and their mother drove them over to the Chateau Marmont in LA. Lana, her sister, and mother waited outside when Natalie went into the hotel to meet some big Hollywood star in the hopes that, again, it would open more doors for her in Hollywood. And her sister Lana remembers Natalie coming back to the car, completely disheveled, looking a mess, and really, really upset. She said her mother and Natalie agreed, and I'm sure with plenty of coaxing from Maria, that they would not publicly disclose who the perpetrator of her assault was so it would not affect her career. But after his passing in 2020, and with many accolades and awards to his name, Natalie's sister named the perpetrator of the assault. It was Kirk Douglas. He would have been in his late 30s at the time that this allegedly happened. Obviously, we're never going to be able to prove if all of these stories were true, but it goes without saying the people in Natalie's life were failing her miserably. All her mother saw was dollar signs and the promise of fame, and she neglected to realize that there was going to be lasting trauma that she was not only allowing, but inflicting on her daughter. She's certainly not winning any Mother of the Year awards, which is actually ironic considering this episode is going to be coming out on Mother's Day. She's not a mom we're celebrating, but my mom is, so happy Mother's Day, Mom. I just think it's so sad. And honestly, I don't know if you guys are country fans, but this whole part of Natalie's life reminds me of the song Fancy by Reba McEntire. Like, what mom acts as basically a sex trafficker to their daughter? It's just so sad that no one was protecting Natalie because she was just a child. That same year, Natalie would audition for a role playing opposite the heartthrob James Dean in a little movie called Rebel Without a Cause. Everybody was trying out for this role, but Natalie, or maybe it was her mother, saw it as an opportunity to finally get Natalie into some adult roles. Again, it's rumored that 16-year-old Natalie had a bit of a casting couch situation with the 44-year-old director Nicholas Ray, but even that didn't land her the role. In an interview later, Natalie said that she had been out partying with another actor named Dennis Hopper when they got in a very bad car crash. The police called Nicholas Ray and he rushed to the hospital to be at Natalie's side. But when he saw Natalie, she told him, kind of love this, she told him that the doctor had called her a GD, you know what that stands for, a GD, juvenile delinquent. So she yells at this 44-year-old director, like 16-year-old Natalie, "Did you hear what he called me, Nick? He called me a GD, juvenile delinquent. Now do I get the part?" And apparently this worked because Nicholas Ray would write a memo to Warner Brothers that said, quote, "We just spent 3 days testing 32 kids. There's only one girl who has shown the capacity to play Judy, and that is Natalie Wood." Rebel Without a Cause was a huge hit and obviously was catapulted even larger than life because James Dean would suddenly die a month before its release. Natalie had proven herself to be an actress finally to be taken seriously. She wasn't getting these child roles just playing the daughter of so-and-so anymore. And she earned her first Academy Award nomination for supporting actress. Natalie was truly coming into her own. And on her 18th birthday, the studio organized a date for her, because apparently that was a thing, with actor Robert, also known as R.J. Wagner. But funny enough, Natalie knew Robert Wagner. She had seen him at the studio at age 10 and told her mom, "I'm going to marry that man someday."
How did you two meet? I want to hear both.
Well, actually, when I was 10 years old, and RJ was about 18, I guess, when you were first under contract, I remember walking down the hallway with my mother, and I saw him, and I said to my mother, "When I grow up, I wish that I could marry him."
Did you really?
I really did.
Did you really know that she...
Well, I didn't know it then. It sure could have saved me a lot of trouble, I'll tell you.
And not long after their meeting, she got her childhood wish because a year later, Robert Wagner proposed to Natalie by putting a pearl and diamond ring into her champagne glass. I'm not one to speculate about someone's sexuality. It is none of my business. But it kind of needs to be talked about in this case because Natalie started hearing some rumors from her friends that Robert Wagner, well, perhaps he was not straight. Many actors during this time had to cover their sexuality, as let's just be real, it was not an accepted thing to be anything but the heterosexual heartthrob that the actors displayed on the screen. Natalie, though, she did not believe any of that for a minute, and she agreed to marry her childhood crush, Robert Wagner. Their relationship went public, and in order to just equate what the media around their relationship was like, think of the Brad Pitt era, like Jennifer Aniston, then he moved on to Angelina Jolie, and every tabloid had it, or Blake Lively and Ryan Reynolds, or heck, in the past couple years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. People were invested. Two rising stars in Hollywood that fell in love together. It seemed too good to be true, and you know what they say about that. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. Natalie and Robert Wagner married in a small ceremony in Scottsdale before celebrating at the Valley Ho on December 28, 1957, but they would publicly announce their separation just 4 years later and finalize their divorce April 27, 1962. The Hollywood rumor mill did what it does, and some said they broke up because Natalie had cheated on Robert. But the other rumor was that Natalie found Robert in bed with a man. I don't know if any of that is true because who knows? Either way, years of mistreatment by men in Hollywood, by her mother, and the demise of her marriage to Robert took a toll on Natalie's mental health. After her divorce, she had started a really tumultuous relationship with Warren Beatty, and when that too ended, unfortunately, Natalie took some sleeping pills in what we believe was an attempt to possibly end her life. Very thankfully, she ended up running down the hallway, banging on the bedroom door of her friend who had been staying at her house, and he took her to Cedars right in time. Natalie survived and got herself into therapy, and I'm going to applaud her for this. Yes, we all deserve to take care of our mental health, but you got to think of the time period, right? Mental health, much less the lasting effects of trauma, all of that was kind of brushed under the rug. It was like, have a drink, relax, pop a pill, get over it. That was the mentality of the day. So I'm glad that she took it upon herself to get into treatment. After some time, when Natalie was feeling better, she continued filming and in the process met, dated, and married a producer named Richard Gregson. Together, they had Natalie's first daughter named Natasha. Natalie had always wanted to be a mom, probably because her own mom was kind of terrible at it. But unfortunately, that marriage would end very quickly, and their divorce was finalized in April of 1972, just 3 years into their marriage. Natalie then decided to do something I think we can all relate to. She went back to an ex, and listen, I get it. If you make it into adulthood more often than not, you have the one that got away. I sure do, and I think Robert Wagner was that for Natalie. Perhaps he represented safety for Natalie, that maybe by rekindling this love with him later in life, after she'd put so much work into her mental health and hopefully he had grown up a bit, they could have the family together that she always wanted. The two got back together, and man, did they get the gossip mags talking when they walked into the red carpet at the 1972 Academy Awards hand in hand.
It was absolutely unbelievable that we got back together again. And we realized how lucky we were to have each other twice in our lives.
They remarried just a few short months later, and soon they welcomed their own daughter, Courtney. Robert and Natalie bought a beautiful boat. Not a boat, actually. I don't think you can call a 60-foot boat. They bought a yacht. 60-foot yacht, and named it the Splendor. And on Thanksgiving weekend, 1981, they invited Natalie's current co-star, Christopher Walken, the more cowbell guy, and a group of friends out for the weekend to enjoy the coast of California. But the weather was terrible, and so most of the guests declined to go, except for Christopher. So Robert, Natalie, Christopher Walken, and Dennis Davern, the boat's caretaker, set sail through rather rough waters to Catalina Island. On November 28th, the three had dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant, and apparently the champagne was flowing to the point that the manager of the restaurant was really concerned about them being able to navigate their dinghy back to where their yacht was anchored. They left the restaurant around 10:30 p.m. that night, And here is where the story gets a bit fuzzy, depending on who you ask. The story at the time is that Christopher Walken and Robert Wagner got in a pretty heated argument. And Robert got so mad that at some point during this argument, he smashed a bottle of wine on a table. It's believed that the two were fighting over maybe like the jealousy. Maybe he thought that Natalie was hitting on her co-star, Christopher Walken. Robert had a history of being more than a little jealous and protective over Natalie. But it's also said that Christopher Walken was talking to Robert that night about what an amazing actress Natalie was and that she should still be pursuing acting. But Robert, on the other hand, thought she should be at home with their young children. Because don't we all need two men arguing over what we decide to do with our life? It was said that Natalie, sick of all this peacocking between the two of them, had gone downstairs to her room to go to sleep. Around 11:30 p.m. that night, very shortly after they had returned to the boat, Robert says that he returned to his room to find Natalie was gone. So he goes up on the boat deck and sees that the dinghy was also gone too. Now I want you to think what you would do in this situation. We all handle stress, shock, worry differently. But I would think we can agree that most of us would probably begin searching for Natalie, waking up the captain of the ship and having him throw on every light possible, cruise the bay, call the Coast Guard, shout out Natalie's name so other boats in the area would know something was wrong, do something. But allegedly, Robert told Dennis he didn't want to draw attention to their boat and that Natalie just must have gone ashore. It was not until 3:30 a.m. that the Coast Guard was finally called. Why the actual heck would they wait nearly 4 hours to call the Coast Guard? I get that these are movie stars. They want some semblance of privacy and paid a pretty penny to have that on their boat. But this is your wife, and she's missing. Privacy be damned. You would think that if he thought his wife was missing, he could use his celebrity status to get more eyes out searching for her. Drop your name, sir. This is the perfect time to do it. That is, if he wanted her found. Sadly, around 8 a.m., 43-year-old beloved actress and mother Natalie Wood was found floating a mile away from their boat in a cove called Blue Cavern Point. Natalie was dressed in a nightgown, wool socks, and a down jacket, and sadly she had passed away. It appeared, as the psychic had predicted, that Natalie Wood would indeed die in dark waters after becoming a star that was recognized the world over. The dinghy was found beached on the shoreline, but suspiciously, the key was in the off position, and it appeared that the motor had never been started. There was also scratch marks on the hull. Did they get there from the boat running ashore, or was it Natalie trying to claw her way onto the boat after falling into the water? But let's just run this back for a second. If Natalie had gotten on the dinghy, annoyed with her husband and Christopher Walken's bickering, making a statement that she was, getting away from their foolishness, like, you guys, I'm going to leave you to it, I'm taking off. Why was the motor never started? A couple named John Payne and Marilyn Wayne, which, wow, that's a lot of rhyming names in that bunch, were anchored nearby that night, and they told police that they had heard a woman yelling, "Help me, someone please help me," around midnight. They said that the voice seemed to be coming from the stern of the yacht Splendor, and Payne suggested it might have been coming from a dinghy attached to the back of the boat. They also said they heard a drunken man's voice shout back at the woman. When the police asked, everyone on board seemed to have the exact same story. Apparently, they all believed that Natalie must have tried to take the dinghy to shore herself and then fallen into the water. But then their story changed. The next story was that she must have heard the dinghy banging against the boat. And now, I would get this. This would be very annoying because my dad has a boat, not a 60-foot yacht, a normal boat. And I've slept in like the little hull area and you can hear the water lapping against it and it's loud. So I imagine if there was a dinghy just kind of hitting the side of the boat because the waters are rough that night, it'd be pretty annoying. So they hypothesized that she went up to secure it more tightly to the side of the boat, hit her head, and fell overboard. Now, Miss Natalie had enjoyed her cocktails that night. She had a blood alcohol of 0.14, which is pretty close to twice the legal driving limit, so she was probably feeling a little loose. She also had a motion sickness pill in her stomach and a painkiller in her system, and these could have potentially intensified the effects of alcohol and made her more of a fall risk. However, none of these stories make any sense to me. Even with lowered inhibitions, you were telling me that the girl who had a lifelong fear of water untied a dinghy in their first story, unties a dinghy and sets sail on her own in the dark of night in rough waters all by herself. Keep in mind, she didn't have a life jacket on her when she was found. So we're supposed to believe that she went by herself in a nightgown, a down jacket, and socks to go to shore. Like, what was she going to do when she got there in that outfit? Like, this is Natalie Wood. She's a famous actress. She can't just go walking up the beach to a hotel in like a jacket and socks. I'm calling BS on that whole story. That coat, very sadly, might have been her downfall. When that down coat hit the water, it ended up weighing close to 40 pounds when they recovered her. And maybe because of alcohol, she didn't think to take it off as it pulled her under. Maybe her panic when she fell into the water didn't even allow her to think clearly. Maybe she didn't take it off because she was not conscious when she hit the water. The other theory that the men on board, Robert, Dennis, and Christopher, said was that she went to lean overboard to tie the dinghy to the boat more securely, and then she fell in. And perhaps this one's more plausible. But again, she was terrified of water. Wouldn't she have asked the captain of the boat to do it? Or if she didn't want to wake him, ask her husband to do it? Let's pretend it happened the way that they told officers, and Natalie went overboard in a terrible, tragic accident. How do they explain their wait to contact the Coast Guard for almost 4 hours? My thought initially is there's something, evidence on board that they didn't want the officers to see. Again, you would think in an emergency like that, your wife goes overboard because if she's not in the boat, she has to be in the water. Like, there's only two possibilities there. So knowing that she can't swim, you would think you would be waking every person in that harbor up with your lights, scouring the area until the police arrived, right? But according to a police report obtained by Natalie's sister Lana, the police only interviewed Walken and Wagner for around 10 minutes or so following her death, and would only briefly speak to Robert Wagner one more time the day after Natalie's funeral, while Robert was laying in his bed with his lawyer present. The coroner ruled Natalie Wood's death as an accidental drowning, which is a bit strange when you look at the autopsy report. Now, I'm going to put this on the screen. I'm also going to share it on Instagram if you're listening on the audio version. No, it is not pictures of Natalie. It's just a sketch. But Natalie had a lot of bruises and abrasions. The coroner said, it's all consistent with falling from the boat, but Natalie was covered in bruises. One on her thigh was up to 2 inches in diameter, and that's a pretty significant bruise. And I tried to figure this out in my head. Like, remember the dinghy had claw marks on it, what they thought was claw marks. Again, maybe it just hit some rocks as it got beached, but they believed it was claw marks. So maybe Natalie is trying to pull herself up onto this dinghy. She has this coat that now weighs 40 pounds, pulling her back in. And so maybe she's trying to flip her little leg on top of the dinghy and pull herself up. Maybe that could cause a bruise. But there was other things that were just odd about this autopsy. The coroner never took nail clippings. This is a very standard practice, not only to see if she had clawed at another person, perhaps, who she was fighting with that night, but to see if she was indeed trying to pull herself up on that dinghy. Did she have any evidence under her nails to support that theory? Well, we're not going to know because they didn't do those clippings, even though it is, again, standard practice. And how do you explain the cut under her left eye? Did all of these bruises really come from a drunken fall from a boat? Or were they bruises that were forming before Natalie ever entered the water? In the years following her passing, Christopher Walken has remained very closed-mouthed about that night, stating it was an accident. He even told Playboy magazine, quote, "The people who are convinced that there was something more to it than what came out in the investigation will never be satisfied with the truth, because the truth is, there is nothing more to it." Years later, Dennis Davern, the captain or caregiver of the Splendor, depends on what article you read, well, he changed his story about what happened that night, and he also collaborated on a tell-all book. He got in contact with Lana, Natalie's sister, and told her he didn't think it was an accident, that Robert had told him and Christopher Walken what to say exactly to police, and then claimed Robert basically forced him to move into his guest house for a year after her death. He said that he felt like he was holding him hostage, so he couldn't tell the truth to police. He went on to say that Robert and Natalie had gotten into a fight that night, and he believed that Robert pushed Natalie into the water, but that he did not see it. Did his story change because at the time he was under the control of Robert Wagner, a very powerful man responsible for his livelihood? Or is it possible that Dennis came out with this story so that he could write a book, do a press tour, and financially capitalize off of this tragedy? I don't know. Unfortunately, people do stuff like that. In 2009, a petition was started to reopen the case of Natalie Wood's death after Lana, Natalie's sister, publicly said that her own investigation into the death of her sister, that she believed Robert Wagner was responsible, and after Dennis had also come forward. 2 years later, they got their wish, and in 2011, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department did reopen Natalie's case. The coroner's office reviewed the autopsy and photos of Natalie's body and actually changed her cause of death to drowning and other undetermined factors, which is something that doesn't often happen in these cases. It is very unusual for one coroner's office to go back and say, nope, something was done incorrectly here. We're going to change the cause of death. It very rarely happens. In 2018, Natalie's death was listed as a suspicious death, and Robert Wagner was listed as a person of interest. I want to make it known, he has never formally been called a suspect. He has never been charged with anything and has always maintained that this was just a tragic accident. Since the case has been reopened, Robert Wagner has refused to speak to the police multiple times when they reached out to him for an interview. Robert Wagner is 94 years old and lives with his wife, actually pretty close to me here in Aspen, Colorado. In his 2008 memoir, he wrote that he and Walken had argued that night, and he confirmed that he did smash the bottle of wine that he initially told police had just fallen over from rough seas and broke. But it was not until he went to bed that he noticed his wife and the dinghy were missing. As for how Natalie fell off the boat, Wagner wrote, "It's all conjecture. Nobody knows. There are only two possibilities. Either she was trying to get away from the argument or she was trying to tie the dinghy. But the bottom line is that nobody knows exactly what happened." In 2020, Robert Wagner was interviewed by Natalie's daughter Natasha about her mother's death in her documentary, Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, and I highly suggest watching it. And I've got to tell you, I had a certain opinion of this case, right? I've always sort of had an opinion about this case, but after watching Robert Wagner's retelling of the story of that weekend, and specifically about his incredible grief following Natalie's death, it was really quite compelling. And then I checked myself, and I remembered Robert Wagner is a trained actor with decades of experience. So I don't know, is he a grieving widower or just playing the role of a grieving widower? We may never know what happened on board the Splendor on November 28th and how Natalie Wood ended up in the water. And I think there's plenty of reasons to be suspicious of the turn of events that evening, of the coroner's quick ruling of accidental drowning despite her numerous bruises and cuts. There's a lot of theories of what could have happened that night, and I'm going to share mine. This is the scenario that rings truest to me, but again, just my opinion. Allegedly, Natalie and Robert, maybe they had a passionate love for each other, one that looked really sweet from the outside, but fueled by their celebrity, the Hollywood rumor mill, and their past breakup could often be jealous and possessive. And perhaps after returning home from dinner that night, Natalie was annoyed with the topic of conversation going on between the two men and went downstairs to go to sleep. But soon the men are shouting and carrying on, and she's getting progressively more annoyed because she wants to go to bed. And instead, her husband and her co-star are having a drag-out argument about her future. So she grabs that big down coat to combat the November chill. Again, she was only in a nightgown and socks, wraps it around herself, and goes up to the boat deck to find Robert Wagner alone after Christopher Walken stormed off to his room following their argument. Fueled on by a little liquid courage, Natalie confronted Robert. Like, what is your problem? What is happening? Why are you guys shouting? Everyone's trying to sleep. What are you doing? Maybe things escalated and he accuses her of flirting with Christopher. After all, they were co-stars at the time, and Walken was just getting done telling Robert that Natalie needs to focus on her career instead of being the stay-at-home mom that Robert wanted her to be. And maybe things got heated between Natalie and Robert. And in a moment, without any premeditation, Robert grabs that wine bottle and hits Natalie. The wine bottle that he first denied breaking, then said he smashed on a table in the middle of an argument. That wine bottle connects, and that's how you get that upward motion abrasion under her eye that's listed in the autopsy report, because I guess you could get that from falling too, but we're just going with my theory here. So Natalie gets really disoriented from the blow and the alcohol in her system and falls overboard. Again, she's just wearing socks and rough seas, right? It makes sense. Robert is shocked by what just happened, but the weight of Natalie's coat starts to pull her petite body down quickly. And before Robert really has the time to react, Natalie was out of his reach. And after a minute or two, her cries stop. He couldn't save Natalie, and now he has to save himself and his reputation. So he unties the dinghy and pushes it off to make it look that maybe Natalie took off on her own. Subduing his panic and shock with a little more alcohol, he formulated a plan. And after some time, he wakes the other men on board and pretends that he had just discovered that Natalie and the dinghy were gone. Knowing that her body and or the dinghy could not get very far in that time, he tells the captain not to turn on the lights, not because he doesn't want to alert the other boats in the harbor, but he doesn't want anyone to see Natalie and the dinghy floating away. That is why the hours-long hesitation to call the Coast Guard. He needed her to be far away enough from the boat that he had plausible deniability. That is why the dinghy's motor was never started. It was carried away like Natalie's body in the turbulent waters that weekend. Robert looked to friends and family like a man who was riddled with grief, not even able to get out of bed for quite some time. But maybe he was haunted by guilt over a second's terrible decision that took his wife's life. Again, that is just my theory of what could have happened that night. What we do know about Natalie is that she was a woman who overcame so much tragedy in her life and gave the love and protection to her little girls that she never got from her own mother. She was absolutely beautiful and vibrant and captivating to watch on screen. And had her life not come to such a quick end, I'm sure she would have given us many more roles to treasure. I can only hope that my theory is dead wrong, and that Natalie was not betrayed by the man she loved in death, and that this was just a horrible, horrible freak accident. But I want to hear what you think. What do you make of the autopsy report and the bruising? Do you think that it was an accident or something maybe more sinister? Let me know in the comments, and also let me know if you want to hear more stories about the dark side of Hollywood. Please follow, subscribe, and share this episode with a friend. I'll love you forever if you do. I will be back next Sunday with a new case. But as always, until then.